Good afternoon, and welcome to this program honoring the memory of Laura Chisolm, who was a really valuable, essential member of our faculty, who passed away much too soon last May. I'm Jonathan Enton. Laura and I joined the faculty at the same time. She was my oldest and one of my closest friends here at the law school. This afternoon, we will hear from several of my colleagues, along with people who taught, studied, and worked with Laura over the years. The program, and there are programs available up near the doors, the program lists most of the speakers. We will be reading some additional tributes from folks who very much regret that they can't be here today. And we have a book out in the lower rotunda next to the display that the library has so kindly prepared, in which all of you are welcome to write your own memories and tributes to Laura. After the program formally concludes, there's also a reception out in the lower rotunda, and we hope that you'll be able to stay to join us. Now, my friendship with Laura dates back to before we officially started teaching, when Laura and Mac, and I guess Adrian too, welcomed Carol and me to Cleveland while we were on our house hunting trip. For the first couple of years, Laura and I held each other's hand as we learned how to teach property. To give you a sense about this, our first day of teaching, we had decided to begin by using an 1823 Supreme Court case called Johnson against McIntosh. The basic issue with the case is who owns a large tract of eastern Illinois. One party claimed through the U.S. government and before that to the British Crown. The other party traced his claim to the Illinois Indian tribe. Now, Daniel Webster represented the party claiming through the Indian tribe, and he made the seemingly revolutionary argument that the Indians were actually human beings with full legal rights. Chief Justice John Marshall wrote the opinion. It's an almost apologetic explanation for why it is that the claimant through the Indians had to lose. So that's the basic drill. About an hour before class, Laura came down to my office and it told me that she had a nightmare about this first day of class, and her nightmare was that she asked who the plaintiff was and nobody knew. So we all had a good laugh about that, and then we went our separate ways. She went to her class, I went to mine, I called on somebody for the facts. He was doing okay for a while, and then, without thinking, I asked, by the way, who was the plaintiff? And it turned out that not one of the 120 students in that class had the foggiest idea. I told Laura about that after class, and loyal friend that she was, she never once, by word or gesture or anything, ever said, "I told you so." Now, you're going to hear later in this program about what a terrific teacher Laura was. Laura had a quiet self-confidence that made it easier for her to invite me to her class when she was teaching a case about a segregation academy in Prince Edward County, Virginia. This is a case that arose out of Brown against Board of Education, and Laura knew that I had written my one and only property article about that case. Of course she knew. I had given her a draft of the article, and it's a whole lot better for her comments. In any event, she asked me to sit in just to make sure that the students got what they needed to get. Of course, she did a superb job, so I really had nothing useful to add. And it's a case that raises some truly arcane issues. The lawyers in the room will appreciate this. They're about defeasible fees and executory interest in the law of trusts. I know that there are some trust lawyers in the room, so I will refrain from saying anything else about them, but let's just say that these issues are matters, shall we say, of acquired taste. Even the tax folks, I think, have more glamorous issues. In any event, I think that this illustrates three important things about Laura. First, her reluctance to hog the spotlight. Second, her willingness to share credit with others. And third, her insistence on making sure that the students got what they were supposed to get, or at least that they had a fighting chance to do so. Now, Laura and I spent a lot of time talking about teaching, and not just about property, because it turns out that we taught some other courses that dealt with some similar issues, although in somewhat different ways. Laura taught nonprofit organizations and legislation. I taught the First Amendment and administrative law. And we spent a lot of time talking about issues such as what sorts of restrictions the government could put on political activities by nonprofit organizations and how courts should interpret ambiguous statutes. We also, as we began to write, shared drafts, as I said earlier. This was not exactly a fair trade. I always got way more out of Laura's comments than she did from mine. And that was, I think, pretty obviously because Laura was an incredible star almost from the word go. I just wish she had written more, but we'll hear through the program about the impact that she had. Here on campus, Laura played an important role at the university's Mandel Center for Nonprofit Organizations, and she was the founding director of the Law School's Center for Social Justice. Now, as the story about my going to Laura's class indicates, Laura was never much for ego or superficiality. It wasn't that she lacked conviction. Rather, it was that she had a keen tactical sense about how to make her point without confrontation. For example, the law school has a truly Byzantine formula for allocating offices. So Byzantine that Laura did not get a window office until 2 years after she got tenure. This formula clearly did not accommodate folks like Laura who did not come straight through high school, college, law school, etc. Now, Laura never explicitly challenged the formula, but on more than one occasion she did suggest that we ought to use a bake-off as the basis for allocating offices. And a lot of people in this room have eaten Laura's cooking, and you'll understand, therefore, that Laura could have had any office anywhere if that were the system. And then there was her time on the university's Library of the Future Committee. This is, for those of you who've been around long enough, a Ray Neff story, which is about all you need to know. But for those of you who don't, Mr. Neff was a bureaucrat who believed that books and traditional scholarly journals either were or were about to be irrelevant, and that the future was all electronic. So he decided, as the chair of the Library of the Future Committee, that the main project should be to create a campus-wide fiber optic network, which we do in fact have. Laura went to one of these meetings, at which he proudly announced that the law school was now the first fully wired building on campus. Afterward, Laura took him aside and said, "Well, that's nice, but I can't log into the system." To which his response was, quote, "That's a lie." Laura took a deep breath and asked him if he'd come over to her office and show her what she was doing wrong. He came over, and he too could not walk into the network. Things got fixed in a hurry after that, needless to say. Now, my very last conversation with Laura will stay with me. I called her some months ago to let her know that some of the leading figures in the law of nonprofit organizations had heard that she wasn't well, and they wanted to commission some papers and essays in her honor. They also said, of course, we don't want to impose this on her, and so they asked me if I would approach her. And there was a long, long pause. And then Laura said, "This is just overwhelming." And then there was another long pause, and she said, "Well, okay, but I hope you understand that I expect to be here to see them." Well, of course, things didn't work out that way. But I can tell you that that issue, those papers have been commissioned. I think the law review has just about all of them at this point. They will appear in this year's volume of the Case Western Reserve Law Review, and we are all very much looking forward to seeing that. Let me just close by saying, as I indicated at the outset, Laura was my oldest and one of my closest friends on this faculty and in this city. It's still hard to accept that I can't walk down the hall and talk to her every day. Laura meant an enormous amount to me, to the students, to the faculty, to the institution. Let me turn things over now to some of my colleagues. First to Bill Leonard, then to Judge Karen Nelson Moore, who can talk a little more about that.
Laura had three major connections to the university, the same three that I have in a way. We're both undergraduate alums, we were both law school alums. We both joined the faculty and became colleagues with our former teachers. I was one of her teachers, and that was a strange thing to see her as a colleague, but I remember the first class, the contracts class that she was in, as a student. She came in, she was sort of a second career student. She was an older student because she had interrupted her studies for family reasons and finished her undergraduate at the undergraduate school here after Matt came to teach at Case. So she was in the class, in the contracts class, sitting next to Ted Prossi every day. And I hadn't taught contracts for very long, maybe a year or two at that point. Sometime early in the semester, I discovered that she was a bit ahead of her classmates in terms of understanding of the material. I don't recall exactly how that happened, but I suspect it must have happened because I called on her. I don't think she volunteered. She didn't volunteer a lot. She certainly didn't impose herself on the class. I've had some older students who want to dominate the discussion. That's not uncommon. But she wasn't like that. She was reluctant to do that. She didn't volunteer a lot. But when I first called on her, it was impressive. And then every once in a while, when I would sort of lose my way or get a little bit confused, as I was wont to do, or a lot confused, as I was wont to do, she would raise a hand and straighten everything out. After that happened once or twice, I said, well, now I know where to go for help. I had another student who used to do that, sort of summarize the material as we finished a section, and he would raise his hand and confuse everything. And I learned not to call on him. In Laura's situation, it was the opposite. when she did intervene, when I was fumbling around, she did it in a wonderful way. She did it in a way that didn't put down any of the students who had already talked, and didn't make me look like a jerk. She did it in a, let's talk about this a little more kind of, see if we can work it out kind of way. The kind of thing that I think we all try to aspire to do as teachers. So it wasn't surprising to me that she became an exceptional teacher. It also wasn't surprising to me after what I saw in the classroom that when I graded the exam, she was at the top of the class. And then it wasn't surprising to me that when I heard about the rank in that class at the end of the year, that she was at the top of the class, or that she graduated at the top of the class. She was just that strong a student. Given that exceptional record, she could have gone off to lots of different sorts of jobs, and no doubt impressed partners in major law firms with her brilliance, as she had impressed her teachers. But she chose to go to a nonprofit, a child advocacy group, sacrificing income and status to work for social justice. And then when she got to the law school, she continued that concern and continued an interest in nonprofits, and then later became the first director of our social justice center. So I think that was a natural progression. John talks about exchanging drafts of articles with Laura. I remember an incident. Ernie Gellhorn was the dean when Laura was hired. And she was in the promotion process, and she had an article that she was working on. She had a draft she was about to send out. And Ernie asked me to read the draft and give her some comments. So I read the draft, and it was, I think it was about some tax issue with respect to nonprofit organizations, nothing that I would have been very much interested in or expert on. But what I do recall about that experience was that as I read the article, I came to a textual footnote about statutory interpretation. And I had taught the legislation course because I'd worked for a congressman. I taught legislation for a number of years, so I did that topic. And she had taken over the legislation course later on. But I got to that footnote, and I had done a lot of reading about statutory interpretation and so on. And in that one footnote, which was probably not more than a page long, she clearly and cogently analyzed the issues and presented the best treatment of that subject I'd ever seen. So in the one footnote, I found what I'd been looking for in all these other places. And it wasn't even the topic of the article. So when we consider academic work and we decide whether to promote people to tenure, we ask whether the work makes a valuable contribution to the literature. And that footnote alone in that draft, I thought was a really substantial contribution. So what she could do was analyze and write. She had analytic ability and she had exceptional writing ability, and the combination is really exceptional. On the other hand, few of our colleagues could match the clutter in her office. There are two candidates I think of immediately, and the late Professor Younger, who might surpass her office, but she did have a cluttered office. But the remarkable thing was that she always seemed to be able to find what she needed. So there was organization there I didn't understand, but there was some. She served on a lot of university and law school committees over the years, but the one I remember in her later years was the law school's budget committee. That was a new committee, and we were concerned then, as now, about matching expenditures and revenues. And there were lots of different views about how to do that, about what the direction of the school should be, and so on. And the faculty basically had not known very much about the budget. So the idea of the budget committee was to dig into those numbers and present that information to the faculty so that the faculty could make some priority judgments. We did that, and in that process, Laura was always practical, reasonable, able to work with faculty colleagues with conflicting views about priorities. And that was important. If we were going to make any progress, we had to get the information out, and we had to do it in a way that people could trust it and rely on it. She was always a calming force when disagreements deteriorated into conflict. Her steadying influence has been missed since her illness prevented her from continuing work here, and that's a number of years. Rarely, as in Laura's case, does an alum return to advance the interests of the school and the alumni so directly and so effectively. She taught many of those who graduated in the last quarter of a century, and she was an outstanding role model. Her brilliance, her work ethic, and her humor were well known to her classmates and to her students and other alums. She lives on in our memories. She's irreplaceable, but each of us can strive to work and live as she did, and I think that would be the best memorial.
Laura Chisolm was a faithful friend and a cherished colleague. All of us fortunate to know her will attest to her stellar qualities in everything she did, personally and professionally. Although taken from us far too soon, Laura's star shines bright in our hearts and minds and memories. I remember first meeting Laura when she was a student in my civil procedure class in the fall of her first year of law school. I had just started teaching at the law school, and Laura's star intellect became apparent immediately. And I think you'll see some of the same themes from me and from John and from Bill Leatherberry. Laura inevitably had a deep and thoughtful response to every question. She was unfailingly prepared and always accurate. In other words, she was a new law professor's dream, especially when she volunteered to answer questions that no other student would touch, and when she filled the awkward gaps that plague a new law teacher. Her comments after class reflected her penetrating insight, and also her caring for those less fortunate or less equipped to deal with the established legal system. It was a privilege to have her as a student. And as you know, Laura's stellar qualities were recognized by all at the law school. She graduated first in her class with accolades from everyone who had the pleasure of teaching her and learning from her. With her outstanding record, she could have pursued the traditional routes of judicial clerkship and or a major national law firm. But instead, Laura went with her passion, working as a lawyer at the Institute for Child Advocacy here in Cleveland, demonstrating her character trait of pursuit of the betterment of others rather than focusing on financial gain or personal prestige. 3 years after her graduation from CWRU Law School, Laura joined the law school's faculty. At the time, there was a dubiousness at many law schools about hiring their own graduates for the faculty. But in Laura's case, we had no doubt that she was extraordinary. From the beginning, students respected her first-rate mind and her compassionate character. Her classroom was devoted to the joy of learning and the exploration of complicated legal concepts. Her classroom humor could be sly, but not at the expense of students. For the decade that we served together on the Case Western Reserve Law School faculty, I was fortunate to count Laura as my trusted colleague and dear friend. I frequently sought out her advice on matters ranging from professional writing and classroom teaching to child rearing and gardening. Laura and I spent many lunch hours at the garden center across the street, where she modestly demonstrated her amazing knowledge of flowers. And typical of Laura, she never flaunted her knowledge, but whether the subject was flowers or property or the law of nonprofit organizations, her knowledge was deep and profound. We often talked of family. Her daughter Adrienne and husband Mac were the stars in her universe. And she provided wise advice to me as I navigated the complexities of a young family. She was the kind of friend that one could always rely on. A friend who could tell the truth, a friend who could thoughtfully solve problems. She was the colleague who would always read and comment on draft articles of others at the expense of time for her own work. When it came time for me to leave the faculty, Laura was the one faculty member I requested to speak at my judicial investiture about my years at the law school. Laura honored me more than I can express, simply by accepting my request. And her comments about the responsibilities of a judge motivate and guide me each day. As you can see, Laura was a treasured student, a treasured colleague, and a treasured friend. Although she's not here with us physically, she remains in spirit, with her life of character, compassion, and joy, motivating all who knew her to work harder to make this world better, especially for those in need. Laura, you are deeply missed.
Thank you. My name is Ted Crossley, and I was a classmate of Laura's. And I see we have at least 3 more in the back here. Steve Miller. keep us, all in tune with that. She listened to our cares and our joys, and she talked to us about Mac and Abe, how proud she was. And we left 30 years ago. We graduated, we moved on to other lives. I took that path that she avoided. We would get together periodically. Maybe it was for an investiture, maybe it was for a wake. And we talked, and it was like time had not passed. I would call her from time to time because I've ended up doing a lot of work with nonprofits, both as a lawyer and as a board member. And so I had an opportunity to pick her brain and what I would like to think bring her back to the real world. So today, as we meet to remember Laura and to share our memories, I must tell you that as I came across the bridge today, I could see her sitting there underlining her casebook with that little cheap plastic ruler and pen. I could see her in the classroom while we sit here with a quiet quip or the profound comment. I could see her with Mac, entertaining her friends, whether they were new or they were old. But most of all today, I see her then when I see you today, Adrian. So thank you.
I'm David Hammock. I'm in the Department of History, but I know Laura from the Mandel Center, and that's what John asked me to talk about. I share the general admiration of Laura Chisholm's intelligence, hard work, focus, perspective, and sparkling good humor that everyone has described so enthusiastically. What I especially want to celebrate are her remarkable contributions to the Mandel Center for Nonprofit Organizations over what is likely to be the entire quarter century of the center's history. I worked closely with Laura for more than 15 years at the Mandel Center. We were both proud of our work at the center, though we felt at every stage that there was much, much more to be done, and that our best efforts had not brought about the essential changes and commitments. Laura's illness and premature death ended our efforts far too soon. Laura first became involved with the center when we were developing its innovative Masters of Nonprofit Organizations degree. It was eminently appropriate that a member of the law school faculty play a central role with that degree. Mort Mandel had decided to create the center after talking with several people, including particularly John Simon of the Yale Law School. According to one story at least, Mr. Mandel first approached Case Western Reserve University about developing a nonprofit leadership program by speaking to the dean of the law school here. When the schools of social work and management agreed to take the lead and sponsor the center, the law school was quickly added so that there was a troika of 3 deans, including the law dean, to whom the center's director reported. From the beginning, it was agreed that a course on the law of tax-exempt nonprofit organizations would form a key part of the Masters of Nonprofit Organizations degree. The idea was not to turn nonprofit leaders into lawyers or to pretend to enable them to make legal judgments. It was rather to equip nonprofit leaders with enough knowledge about the law to enable them to recognize most issues when they met them, most legal issues when they met them. It was also to help nonprofit leaders think about policy alternatives. Laura often pointed out that a law degree could also prepare people for nonprofit leadership, and I know she was proud of the law school's record in educating nonprofit lawyers. But like Paul Feinberg, who often taught the law course, she agreed strongly that education and legal thinking should be included in the ideal curriculum for the nonprofit field. The nonprofit course remains one of the Master of Nonprofit Organizations' most notable and distinguishing features. Laura Chisholm was exceptionally well suited to develop the nonprofit course and to play an important leadership role in the Mandel Center. As others are noting this afternoon, and as my daughter, who earned her law degree in this school and who studied with Professor Chisolm, has told me, she was an excellent teacher of the law. The range of her law courses, from legislation and social policy to property and wills and trusts, as well as the law of nonprofit organizations, was all relevant to the needs of students of nonprofits. Over the course of her career, she built extensive experience with nonprofit leaders in many fields, working with people in healthcare, in child care, with initiatives for the education of trustees, with small and large organizations. And I'm sure she had more experience than she might have wished as a member of CWRU committees dealing with faculty grievances, promotion and tenure, and other cheerful topics. She also served as a trustee of programs relating to children with Women's Space and the Ohio Ballet. I think those who are here know a great deal about her recognition as a specialist in the nonprofit, the field of nonprofit law. Several of her achievements are noted in the program. I'd add that among her last publications was the article on the federal tax treatment of charitable organizations that she wrote with John Simon of Yale and Harvey Dale of NYU in the field-defining book, The Nonprofit Sector, a Research Handbook. She published on such varied topics as health organizations and tax exemption, politics and charity and tax exemption, tax-induced distortions, and nonprofit advocacy. And some of her most important public work, as I understand it, dealt with the tension between accountability and the right to advocate and to raise money for advocacy. I want to end by emphasizing the quality of the vision that Laura Chisolm brought to her leadership role within the Mandel Center, and also by emphasizing her tough, persistent commitment to the notion that the center could play a role of great value in Case Western Reserve and for the nonprofit and non-government field in general. Laura represented the law school in the Mandel Center's faculty leadership from 1994 to the end of her life. In the internal affairs of the center, she was probably the most active senior member of the faculty, apart from those who served in the executive director role. She represented the faculty on the center's program Faculty Executive Council, and she served for years on a series of committees in which the center's executive director and a few leading members of the faculty met with members of the representatives of the Mandel Foundation. Consistently, she pushed for the highest standards in recruiting students, the highest standards in terms of leadership potential as well as academic capability. She pushed for an effort to attract and recruit students on a national and indeed international basis. She insisted that an A meant truly excellent work. She pressed for the highest standards of research and publication by the center's faculty and in its journal. She understood that the best way for a serious research university to contribute to nonprofit leadership in its own city was to offer the best possible education in each field it takes up. And she knew from her wide experience that Cleveland's legal community and internationally notable nonprofit organizations make it one of the best places anywhere for excellence in that field. Her own record of professional achievement and first-rate teaching perfectly illustrates her case. I miss her.
I mentioned earlier that we have some tributes to Laura from people who have said that they really wish they could be here. And I have two that I want to read now. The first is from Harvey Dale at NYU. The second is from John Simon at Yale, both of whom David just talked about. First, from Harvey Dale. I met Laura Chisolm in Cleveland on a sunny day in the mid-1980s. The New York University School of Law had recently begun a study on philanthropy and the law that I was directing. The Mandel Center for Nonprofit Organizations was already in operation at Case Western Reserve University, and I wanted to understand its mission, programs, processes, and organization. Laura was the law school's representative at the Mandel Center, and she agreed to spend some time with me. Laura, not then yet a tenured full professor, spent several hours with me that day, patiently explaining everything I wanted to know about the Mandel Center. By the time I left to fly back to New York City, I had learned a lot. Some of what I learned involved the Mandel Center, but my strongest impressions were of Laura herself. Even in those first few hours, she impressed me with her intelligence, kindness, patience, good humor, amazing personal warmth. It was the beginning of a wonderful friendship. Before long, to my good fortune, I had managed to enlist Laura's support for the study I was undertaking, and then for the program and the National Center that followed. Over many years, Laura was an unfailing source of good judgment, good cheer, and good companionship. She served as a member of the Board of Advisors to the NCPL, the National Center for Philanthropy and Law. She prepared and presented 2 major papers at conferences of the center. She was a stalwart and enthusiastic participant in the center's work. She was always cheerfully available to lend a hand and to provide thoughtful guidance. In the late 1980s, a small group of academics and practitioners, all of whom shared a deep interest in legal issues affecting nonprofit organizations, organized an informal club called the Nonprofit Forum. The forum has met in New York City every other month since then. Every member, in rotation, prepares a paper on an area in which the law impacts charities, and each presents a paper at the forum dinner. The ensuing dialogue and debate are rigorous and often boisterous. Laura was one of the first members of the forum. She rarely missed those dinners, even though she had to travel from Cleveland to attend them. And she was an unfailingly energetic participant in those discussions. Her contributions were many, and her enthusiasm was always palpable. One of Laura's and my closest colleagues, Professor John Simon of the Yale Law School, had, in 1987, written a chapter on the federal tax treatment of charitable organizations for a research handbook on nonprofits. When the handbook's original editor suggested, a decade later, that the chapter should be updated, John asked Laura and me to join him in that task as co-authors. The 3 of us labored on that chapter for about 5 years, sharing drafts, comments, and insights. We met on dozens of occasions to work on our emerging text. We had been admonished by the editors that the final product should be about 30 typed pages. What we submitted, and what was in fact published, was more than 3 times that long, despite our best efforts to achieve brevity because of the immense complexity of the subject matter. Out of all the hundreds of hours that Laura and I spent together, I remember many things. I remember her trenchant intellect and the manner in which she could clarify issues or criticize others' views without ever offending personally. I remember how she could provide insights into seemingly impenetrable complexity and how she could illuminate paths toward solutions of gnarled problems. You know, this is beginning to sound familiar, but there's a reason for that. I remember her joy at being engaged in challenging discussions. I remember her laughter, which was husky and happy and infectious. I remember her effortless kindness and sensitivity to everyone with whom she interacted. I remember the impact she had nearly entering a room of colleagues because all of them shared enormous affection for her. I remember her grace and her beauty. In all these ways, in mind, heart, friendship, and grace, Laura was always the light in the room. The room is now, sadly, darker. I shall miss her, but her memory will always remain to lift my spirits and to remind me of that wonderful, ineffable, warmly glowing light that she brought to every room she entered and everyone she knew. What a gift. I am and will forever be immensely grateful for having been a recipient. We also have something from John Simon, and let me read this as well. Because Harvey Dale and I shared several activities with our wonderful colleague Laura Chisolm, writing in nonprofit institutions book chapter, participating in the Nonprofit Forum and the National Center on Philanthropy and the Law, as well as involvement with the Mandel Center for Nonprofit Organizations, my own prose covering these interactions would track Harvey's account to a point suggestive of plagiarism. Accordingly, I I am at a point where words fail, as the saying goes, but they fail a little less, perhaps, if I turn from prose to poetry, or at least some brief doggerel, to cover some of the Dale Simon common ground, and to convey my appreciation bordering on worship of Laura, wonderful scholar, colleague, and friend. Now, the little ode. Laura's life was one great story. Every chapter rates applause. Lawyer, teacher, scholar, mother, did it all without a pause. Everywhere that Laura walked, she offered wit and wisdom too. To Mandel, she gave sound counsel, as she did at NYU. All of NCPL's sessions were enriched by Laura's work, as were more than 20 years of NP forums in New York. Now we turn to Laura's gifts to her co-authors, Harvey, John. Both her genius and her grace made her a partner, paragon. Endless labor on our chapter, but it was a happy climb. Thanks to so much care and spirit Laura gave us all the time. Tears for Laura, to be sure, though drying them will take a while. Even now, we're finding out that thoughts of Laura bring a smile.
That was lovely. It's difficult to follow that. I'm Jacqueline Lipton. I'm the Faculty Development Dean here at the Law School. And I doubt very much that I would be a Faculty Development Dean or have wanted to have one if it wasn't for having Laura as my colleague. We didn't have a person in my position when I came here on the tenure track, but we did have Laura. And she made just a huge difference to someone like me who had come from another country, to this very strange corner of the world. We didn't have a lot of women on the faculty at that point. Some would say we still don't, but we sure have more than we did then. All of the issues that faced me as a new immigrant, a new faculty member, a new woman faculty member, I was pretty perplexed for a couple of years there, and I have some great colleagues here, and Max did his best to explain the ropes to me as the P&T chair. But you know, someone said, well, why don't you go and talk to one of the senior female faculty members about what's puzzling you? And of course, Laura never imposed herself, as others have said. I sought her out, and of course, she was only too happy to be available to me and to the other women faculty. She was so gracious with her time. She would stay back after work, usually suggesting a few drinks at Sergio's, which was, always very nice. Let me sit in on her classes, and I can attest to just what a terrific teacher she was. I mean, she would teach a room of 100 property law students, and they were all engaged, and they were all happy and comfortable and asking questions and knew the material and terrifically respected her. And I figured if I could be half the teacher that she was, I would be really happy with that as an achievement. One thing that she did prompt me to do early on while still on the tenure track, and it always brings a smile to my face to think about this one episode, and luckily the faculty member I'm going to talk about isn't here, so I won't embarrass him. But she had suggested there were a couple of women faculty on the second floor, a couple in the clinic, but we didn't get together, and we didn't get to sort of share stories about how difficult it was to balance work and family life and all of that kind of thing. So we set up this informal women faculty lunch group, and we'd get together every month or two throughout the semester and just go somewhere and have lunch. And there was just this one great time where we checked out the new Case Club. It had just moved to Severance, and we checked it out, and a whole lot of people came. All the women faculty came because we were interested in what the food would be like mainly. And so there were about 10, 12 of us around this huge table, and one of our male colleagues wandered in, obviously wanting a quiet place to do some reading over lunch, and he looked at the table and was horrified and wondered if we were plotting a tremendous coup. And I just remember Laura saying, well, you know, should we invite him over? And we decided not to. We decided to do stew. But he's not here. You can guess who he was. He's still on the faculty. I also wanted to really commend Laura for her mentorship, again, particularly to women. I mean, John asked if anyone wanted to speak, and I think what I did want to speak about was just what a difference she made to those of us who, you know, really struggled with how do you balance a family. I've had all my kids since I've been on the faculty here, and she really was a radical feminist earth mother. That's such a great phrase that I heard for the first time today. She's just wonderful. And she was so great about telling me how to get my priorities right, telling me how to keep things in perspective, and making sure that women knew to spend the time they needed to spend with their families. And I can't believe I'm the first person today to mention her knitting, because it was a big feature at the Botanical Garden, but I am the recipient of, in fact, the exact same sweater that was on the slide at the Botanical Garden. She knitted that for my first child. I now have my third baby who is about to fit into that very same sweater, and I remember in the middle of some faculty battle over something or other, my second child had just fitted into this sweater for the first time, and I sent Laura an email picture of my daughter wearing the sweater, and I said, I just wanted you to know we kept the sweater and it still fits, and my second child is wearing it now. And she just emailed back, now that's the kind of email I needed to get this week. And I still have kept that email. So there's really not a lot more I can say. I didn't know Laura for as long as many of you did. I've been on the faculty 10 years, but obviously many of you have known her a lot longer than I did. But I did want people to be aware that despite being quiet and calm and not inserting herself into difficult situations and making them worse, she was always there. She was always available. She taught me so much. She taught me the importance of good mentoring. She taught me about the special challenges often that women face when they confront a career and a balance of a family life. She kept things in perspective herself, and I hope that I can model at least some of that. I'm sure I'm not nearly as successful as she was. And at the end of the day, I really wanted Guy and Adrian to know that many, many of us want to thank you so much for sharing her with us on the faculty.
My name is Jessie Hill. I'm a professor here at the law school and now the director of the Center for Social Justice. I'm going to give my own remarks about Laura, and then I also have some remarks to read from Dan Van Grol, who is a former student of Laura's, that he couldn't be here, but he did send them along. I worked with Laura primarily in my capacity as Associate Director of the Center for Social Justice, of which she, of course, was the founding director. Yet, as is probably true of many of my colleagues, I came to know her and admire her most as a fellow faculty member, friend, and mentor. And actually, it's funny that Jackie brings up the sweater, because I too received a beautiful hand-knit sweater when my older daughter was born. And actually then it went on by my second daughter, and for literally years. I mean, these things, they stretched. It was unbelievable. I have no idea how somebody like Laura finds time to knit these sweaters with like magical qualities, but you know, I think it's just typical of her sort of thoughtfulness and her kindness and her amazing talents, that, you know, hidden talents, some of them hidden. Laura was a reliable advocate and a trustworthy friend to her more junior colleagues, and as Jackie was just saying, you know, she especially looked out for the other women on the faculty. Though Laura never went looking for a fight, you always knew which side she was on, and that would be the right side. And usually the side of the more vulnerable party. But I think people associate me with Laura primarily because of the Center for Social Justice. And so I do just want to say a few words about that, because the center was really the perfect fit for Laura, and she for it. She was extraordinarily committed as its leader. And among the many tragic aspects of Laura's passing at an early age is that she never fully got to realize her vision for the center, and we never really got to see where it would go under her stewardship. But she made her mark, certainly, and the center's work today still carries her vision in a lot of ways. I think most of all, this is most visible in the center's focus, primary focus on students. As director, Laura was completely focused on what the center meant to students and what it could do for them. Just to give an example, in her expenditure of center funds, she could be, one might say, parsimonious, except when it came to students. She wanted to save every available, cut corners and save every available penny so that she could help fund student public interest fellowships. And I'm proud to say that under Laura's leadership, there was a time when nearly every student with a qualifying summer job was able to get some funding from the center for the first time ever, I think, for this law school. But Laura's vision stretched beyond just enabling students to afford to spend their summer in public interest work. The center's real mission, as she saw it, was to create a community. As she rightly recognized, there was no home in the law school for students who cared about and wanted to work towards social justice. In taking the reins of the center, Laura didn't care about empire building or flashy programming. What she cared about was creating a community for students who, it turns out, were desperately seeking one. She wanted to create a sense of belonging for a group that had felt marginalized. And thus, it's not surprising that under Laura's leadership, an extraordinarily dedicated and vibrant student organization, Law Students for Social Justice, also sprang up. These students continue to meet regularly as a student group and to arrange an impressive array of pro bono projects, speakers, and other social justice-oriented programs. Together with the law students and the postgraduate VISTA fellows that Laura had managed to secure for the center, Laura oversaw the initiation of the center's involvement with the Ohio Benefits Bank at the East Cleveland Public Library, and I see some of my current social justice fellows here, where law students basically go to the public library and screen and assist community residents in applying for public benefits such as food stamps and heating assistance. It has been really gratifying for me to be involved in all of the center's good work and to have the opportunity to assist Laura with it. Ironically, though, I felt like I didn't get the chance to work as closely with her on center matters as I maybe would have liked. I think that's because for most of the time that Laura was running the center, I was an untenured member of the faculty, although I was the associate director, and she was fiercely protective of me. And of course, I got the feeling that Laura was not much of a delegator to begin with. She was actually, kind of the opposite of that. She was the exact opposite of the sort of person who would, saddle others with work and then take all the credit. She had difficulty, as other people pointed out, taking credit for everything she did. And in fact, if there was any aspect of administering the center that she didn't excel at, I think it would be the sort of unpalatable but possibly necessary self-promotion that every administrator and leader has to engage in. Laura was extremely humble. She rarely placed any demands on me, but always insisted on sharing credit with me, even when it wasn't exactly due. And then finally, I just want to say a word about Laura as a fellow teacher. She confided to me once early on that even after her decades as a law professor, she still felt nervous before teaching each class. And at the time, I was a brand new assistant professor, and I found this absolutely astounding because I had already come to find out about Laura's reputation as a wonderful, skilled, but also very laid back and engaging teacher. I couldn't even imagine her being nervous about it. But now, of course, I see that this admission, too, really demonstrates her humility, as well as her profound respect for the students whose education was in her hands. So it's not hard to see why Laura was so admired. Her deep dedication to students, combined with her obvious intelligence and genuine humility, are no doubt what made her an excellent teacher, an inspiring center director, and of course, a treasured colleague. I will miss her. And now I'd like to move on to read the tribute from, as I said, Dan Van Grol, who graduated from the law school here in 2009, and he's working now in Texas, and so he was unfortunately not able to be here, but he was one of the center's first fellows in his as a postgraduate student. So he worked closely with Laura. I am fortunate to count myself among the lucky 1/3 of this law school's 2009 graduating class that had the distinction of taking property with Professor Chisolm during the spring semester of my 1L year. As someone who needed extra attention in the subject, she always made time to meet after class, in her office, if you could find a place to sit, in the hall, in line at Shtick's, wherever. She always welcomed questions and debate on issues, though it is hard to call any conversation I had with Professor Chisolm much of a debate, as she was always right. Her dedication to her students was admirable to me then, and as I look back in hindsight to everything else that was going on in her life in the spring of 2007, it is downright remarkable. I was privileged to have the opportunity to get to know Professor Chisolm in a different capacity when she selected me as a fellow for the Center for Social Justice in the summer after my graduation. Under Professor Chisolm's leadership as director, the center has helped fund dozens of unpaid summer public internships, allowing law students to volunteer and experience opportunities that they may not have had the financial capability to do otherwise. It is no exaggeration to say that through these magnificent students, Professor Chisolm's influence has traversed continents and oceans. One summer recipient, for example, worked in Nairobi, Kenya, on child sexual assault, illegal detention, and police brutality issues. Another worked at the Appalachian Citizens Law Center in Whitesburg, Kentucky, on issues raised by coal miners that ranged from black lung benefit claims to retaliation claims for reporting unsafe mining conditions. Several others were given the opportunity to work for public defenders' offices and legal aid here in Cleveland, and as far away as California and Florida. These are just a few examples of the many others whose work in the areas of public interest were made more easily attainable with the help of Professor Chisolm's leadership. Many of the projects undertaken by the center under the directorship of Professor Chisolm were often daunting, but her brilliance and encouragement were unrelenting. I personally witnessed her actively engaged in the establishment and fostering of the Social Justice Alliance at Case Western Reserve, which is a university level committee alliance. The alliance is an interdisciplinary group comprised of distinctive faculty and staff from the greater university with the intention of building collaborations to tackle various issues relating to the law school center's goals. Through her vision and help, the university held meetings with civic leaders in East Cleveland with the goal of establishing ties with our municipal neighbor in hopes of combating social justice problems on our home front. The center also established a successful and ongoing working relationship with the Mandel School of Applied Social Sciences Poverty Center. Professor Chisolm was my law professor, my first boss as a law graduate and attorney, a mentor, and a friend. To know Laura was to respect and admire her. By my estimation, her kindness and generosity were the only things capable of living up to her genius. I was a better student because of her, am a better lawyer because of her, and continue to strive to be a better person because of her.
Two other of Laura's students have sent us some things that they asked to share. The first is from Christine Korkos, who graduated in the class of 1990 and was as well a member of the library staff and the associate director of the library before she moved on to become a director in her own right. What I remember initially about Laura Chisolm is her role as a teacher, because I first got to know her when I was a student in one of her classes. She was quiet and earnest, but also often smiling. She was very serious without being solemn. While she was always exacting, as a teacher, she was always quick to recognize the accomplishments of her students. She knew that students want approval and will try harder, do more, and function better with it than without it. Laura had a tremendous influence on me, although I don't think I realized the enormity of her effect until I sat down to write this remembrance. While I was a student, I was interested in what kind of research my professors did. I tried to figure out what the link was between their personalities and interests and what they studied. With Laura in particular, I could discern that kind of fit, that kind of connection between what mattered to her and her scholarship, and between that and her daily work, her teaching. She was one of the first faculty members I had met whose research both excited her and seemed to matter to the rest of the world as much as it did to her. As someone, by the way, who taught Chris myself, and for those of you who know what I write about, you can understand why Chris had this feeling about Laura and not about me. What I also noticed about her was her obvious love of teaching. That love made it very clear to me that it was possible to find some kind of intersection between whatever scholarship I might decide to pursue with the day-to-day work that I did. I decided that I needed to find some kind of scholarship that I would find exciting and that would mesh with my day-to-day activities. I didn't know at the time what that area of scholarship could be, but because Laura had found it, I was sure I could find it too. Laura's influence on me was thus profound, not necessarily because of anything she said, but because of the obvious satisfaction she took in her own work. I wanted to feel that way about my life's work. Laura was someone whom I could take as a model, a lawyer, a scholar, someone who was active in the community. She was engaged in the world. She found a way through law and life to make a difference. After I earned my degree, passed the bar, and began teaching a class at the law school, Laura was very welcoming. For me, the shift from student to instructor at the school where I earned my degree was difficult. Because she had done the same thing, she understood that, and in her quiet way, she helped me make the transition. So many years later, I do some of the things Laura did and wonder how she did them, and so many more so admirably, and made them look so easy. But I do not wonder about whether I should have taken her as a model. She showed me what I could be as a lawyer, a teacher, and a thinker. Commit to the cause that moves you. Make a difference. Laura Chisolm, through her too short life and generous spirit, knew the importance of work and commitment that engages your mind both daily and long term, a cause that matters to you and lifts your heart. And Laura matters, not just to her family and to her friends, but to and through those students and colleagues to whom her influence endures. The other tribute is from Lisa Ruda, who graduated in 1994. Lisa says, "It is both my honor and a privilege to say a few words about my dearest law school professor. In the 3 months since she passed, I am sure to have heard and will continue to hear what a remarkable woman she was. Simply put, there was not another professor like Laura Brown Chisolm at Case Western Reserve University. I was blessed enough to meet her outside of the regular classroom as well. 2 of my dearest law school friends had taken several of her courses. As the three of us often rolled as the Three Musketeers, I eventually met Professor Chisolm as well. We hit it off. She encouraged me to sign up for one of her courses. In fact, I believe that she transferred me into it. The rest was history. She made my law school experience truly an experience. 2 of my favorite stories about her. One day after class, the 4 of us were sitting around talking. Professor Chisolm always looked fantastic, but this day she was wearing a particularly great outfit. We simply asked her why and how she always looked so great. She quickly lifted her skirt above her knee and said that she really didn't have it that together. We looked down and saw her boots were too big for her skinny calves, and that she'd put a bunch of rubber bands around her boots to keep them. The other moment was around the senior auction. She did not want to sign up as a prize, or as a package students could bid on. The three of us were not completely inclined to bid on any professor-based prize. We put our heads together and she agreed to host a dinner at her home, and we agreed to be the high bidder on the package. Needless to say, we were the high bidder, and we had a remarkable dinner at the Chisolm home about 16 years ago. We ate well, laughed. Mac joined the group, and as Lisa says, eventually Mac headed up to sleep. Now, that seemed like a reasonable time, but Lisa says, the four of us stayed talking and laughing with Laura until about 4 a.m. I remember finally leaving and asking my two friends if I thought we had overstayed our welcome. They and I quickly concluded, heck no. She loved us. More important, we loved her. Years later, my two friends and I remain close. As fate would have it, one lives in Virginia, the other in Maryland. I live in the District of Columbia. We are never more than a short drive apart. We talked last May, the day after we learned that Professor Chisolm had died. We each cried when we learned that she passed. I truly am not sure if it was her presence, her beauty, her sense of humor, her smarts, or her heart. But please know that Professor Chisolm left an indelible print on me and many others. When we get together for dinner, please know our first toast will be to her.
Mac Chisolm, who lived with the radical feminist, her mother, for 4 decades and more. I'd like to start with a few thank yous to Jonathan Enton. Thank you so much for putting this memorial to Laura together. She would be embarrassed, pleased if she could only know what took place here today. I know it was a labor of great friendship on your part, but Adrian and I are so touched. And to those who spoke today, thank you for the wonderful remembrances. It's one thing to know where one's spouse works, or in Adrian's case, where your mom works, and to be involved in little pieces of her job, but very rare to get a glimpse of how she affected her workplace and her colleagues. Today was a treasure for my heart and Adrian's, and we'll carry away the thoughts from today and hold them forever. To everyone here from the law school family, faculty, staff, former students, alumni, friends, thank you for being here. Your tribute to Laura through your presence has been wonderful to get to watch. In addition, the support that your presence brings to us is a huge gift. You've all been so generous and active in expressing your caring for Laura and support for us. We have received beautiful remembrances and words of sympathy, and have been apprised of many donations to charities that you've made in her name. So for me and Aid, on behalf of Laura and from our family members who could not be here, an enormous and heartfelt thank you. You can't imagine how important and how soothing that support has been to us during our attempts to recover from losing Laura. Laura had many traits, personality, strengths, and quirks, many of which have been highlighted today, including her hilarious but sometimes very biting wit and her intellect. And there's no real need to sort all these or prioritize them. But I've been captivated in these 4 months since her death by my reflections on one of them, that being her unassuming nature and have been influenced through her lingering spirit by another trait, that being her ability to think critically. I have lived and worked for decades in academia, as so many of you in this room have. We all know about academia. What we all know about academia is that it promotes behaviors that are really anything but humble. We live to see our pieces published. We know that we move ahead by flying our own flags at professional meetings, and we keep bringing attention to ourselves and our latest accomplishments to keep our careers in motion. Laura was just different. She was one of the rare ones who stayed unassuming. Other than shamelessly gloating when she won at Scrabble, she seemed devoid of any ability or need to self-promote, and best I can tell, spent almost no efforts in that endeavor. There is an inherent generosity in that rare trait, and I would really like to be more like that myself. Her ability to think critically was, in my observation, and as you've heard from today, the reflections of a lot of others, above the norm. She could put aside political correctness, political expediency, emotional attachment, and self-gain to look dispassionately at facts and at truths. Because she could do that, I'm guessing a lot of you in this room experienced her disagreeing with you. I know I have. She had the strongest belief in and respect for academic discourse, and for all the right reasons. And I would really like to be more like that too. While she could look at facts dispassionately, she was anything but dispassionate after she'd made up her mind. She was not able to hide her enthusiasm or her disdain when she discussed things that mattered to her. She could never have been a winning poker player. And it was this passion, I think, that made her so fiercely loyal. As only a handful of you know, I came in here every night after dinner for a few weeks after she died to go through her office, already a legend from this podium, item by item. Those of you who peeked in her office in recent years know why I was here for quite a few nights. What jumped out at me about her from going through her office as well as her belongings at home is how much longer she planned to be here and how many more things she wanted to do. All of that accumulated stuff was a combination of things she wanted to get to and things she held on to. And among those latter things that she held on to were things that amused her, things that held beauty or sentiment for her, things from people she loved and who loved her. And there were just a lot of these. Adrienne and I were each holding one of her hands as she took her last breath. Sorry. We lost so much that day, and that loss will likely remain immeasurable. But there are her ways of being that are left behind in my consciousness, and I hope they will continue to change me for the better. What a wonderful gift. Again, Jonathan and all of you, thank you very much.
That concludes the formal program. We've gone longer than I think we expected, but I think in a good cause. Please join us in the Lower Rotunda reception, and for those of you who are so inclined, please contribute your own memories and reflections in the book. Thanks.